Time star tight end for the New England Patriots, Aaron Hernandez, was found dead.
With Adams, a former league defender, unleashed a horrific massacre, claiming half a dozen lives before taking his own, abandoning a child to navigate the devastating wreckage of his actions. This is the untold, gripping story of the innocent kids left standing in the shadows of fallen gridiron titans. The saga of Aaron Hernandez is an absolutely chilling one. His existence came to a brutal halt at an age when most pro athletes are barely finding their footing. At merely 22 years old, he had already forged an unstoppable, lethal offensive duo right next to Rob Gronkowski, terrorizing defenses nationwide. Yet his meteoric rise violently crashed into oblivion, morphing into one of the darkest and most notorious controversies in professional sports history. Caught in the crossfire of his total ruin was a young daughter, doomed to inherit a reputation stained by blaring tabloids and endless legal battles, and cold penitentiary bars instead of glorious touchdown reels. Hernandez had stormed into the big leagues fresh off an incredibly dominant run with the Florida Gators. Back in 2009, he snagged the prestigious John Mackey Award for collegiate excellence at his position, serving as the crucial engine behind Florida's run to the national title that same season. Nobody questioned his sheer physical dominance, but whispering shadows of reckless off-the-field conduct haunted his entire draft evaluation process. Several franchises outright scrubbed his name from their prospect lists, entirely spooked by his massive red flags and a documented history of failed substance screenings. Ignoring those glaring sirens, New England scooped him up in the 4th round of the 2010 draft, a gamble that initially looked like an absolute genius move. Plugged into the Patriots system, he morphed into an unguardable nightmare who could block on the line, sprint outside like a wideout, or shift seamlessly into the running back slot. Paired with Gronkowski, he engineered an offensive juggernaut that essentially forced rival defensive coordinators to pick their poison every single Sunday. New England punched their ticket to Super Bowl 46 during the 2011 campaign, and it genuinely felt like this young phenom was just barely scratching the surface of greatness. By 2012, the front office went all in, locking him down with a massive 5-year contract extension valued at almost $40 million. At just 22, he possessed lifelong generational wealth, widespread fame, and the keys to a perennial championship powerhouse. However, completely hidden away from the roaring crowds, ominous warning signs were aggressively bubbling to the surface. Former locker room peers eventually painted him as wildly erratic, constantly running with a dangerous crowd and vanishing to a secret hideaway strictly used for stashing narcotics and firearms. The final curtain fell in June 2013. That summer, law enforcement slapped cuffs on the superstar for executing Odin Lloyd, a semi-pro athlete romantically tied to the sister of Hernandez's future bride. Detectives closed the net with breathtaking speed. Security cameras, damning phone records, and eyewitnesses all pinpointed the tight end near the exact spot where Lloyd was discovered, bullet-riddled in a grim Massachusetts industrial zone right by the player's mansion. Merely hours after authorities marched him out in handcuffs, the Patriots viciously severed all ties without a second thought, dumping an athlete they had just promised an absolute fortune. The resulting trial instantly erupted into arguably the most mind-blowing criminal saga ever connected to an active football superstar. Fast forward to 2015, and a Massachusetts jury officially hammered down a devastating first-degree homicide conviction. The judge slapped him with life behind bars with zero chance of walking free, shipping him straight to the Souza Baranowski Correctional Center, an absolute fortress of a maximum security prison, locked away in his cell. The disgraced athlete was dragged into yet another high-stakes trial regarding a bloody 2012 double homicide right outside a bustling Boston nightclub. State attorneys insisted he pulled the trigger following a minor verbal clash on the dance floor. But in April 2017, the jury shocked the world by clearing him completely of the grisly twin murders. A mere 5 days post-acquittal, guards discovered his lifeless body dangling in his solitary confinement unit, ruled an apparent suicide. His passing sparked a deeply bizarre twist in the legal system, since he perished right in the middle of his active appeals process. An incredibly obscure state law technically erased his initial murder conviction from the books. Naturally, This infuriating legal loophole triggered an absolute firestorm of outrage from the grieving family and the prosecuting attorneys. By 2019, the state's highest courts finally struck down the technicality, permanently stamping the guilty verdict back onto his record for Lloyd's brutal execution. In the gruesome aftermath, neuroscientists at Boston University cracked open the truth, diagnosing his brain with a terrifyingly severe, crippling form of CTE. Yet, while the brutal true crime details and horrifying medical revelations utterly hijacked the media cycle, a totally innocent life was silently enduring. The fallout in the shadows, his little girl, Aaron Hernandez, born in 2012, right as her dad was touching the pinnacle of his athletic glory. Avielle entered a world where her father was a beloved New England icon and his bond with sweetheart Cheyenne Jenkins looked rock solid. The two were childhood friends who had blossomed into high school sweethearts, weaving what seemed like a picture-perfect romance. The moment his daughter arrived, the star tight end heavily played up the devoted dad angle, boasting to reporters about securing a golden future for his bloodline, an illusion that violently shattered just 12 months later. Once the steel doors slammed shut on him, Avielle was instantly yanked out of the glaring flashes of the paparazzi. Cheyenne fiercely guarded her child's privacy, shielding her from the absolute circus of cameras while bravely navigating the brutal public witch hunt tied to her fiancé's downfall. Crushing financial chaos quickly piled up too. The franchise shredded his lucrative deals the second the cuffs clicked, fighting ruthlessly to claw back every penny of his massive signing bonuses. In total defiance of the suffocating darkness surrounding her father's demise, Avielle has beautifully bloomed into a regular kid, enjoying a wonderfully typical youth. Now and then, Cheyenne proudly drops glimpses into her world, highlighting the vibrant little girl thriving in academics, leaping across gymnastics mats, and dominating dance recitals. Then there's Junior Seau. The legendary linebacker practically carved his name into Mount Rushmore with one of football's most majestic careers before his very existence descended into absolute tragedy. Junior Seau burst onto the professional scene as the number 5 overall selection in the 1990 NFL Draft, fresh off an absolutely crushing collegiate run with the USC Trojans. The second he touched down in San Diego, the entire defensive identity shifted. He racked up staggering tackle statistics year in and year out. He locked down 12 trips to the Pro Bowl and secured first-team All-Pro honors a remarkable 6 times. He essentially became the pulsing heartbeat of that roster, cementing his status as a legendary, instantly recognizable linebacker of his generation. Throughout the 1994 campaign, Seau propelled the Chargers all the way to Super Bowl 29. His fiery presence and sheer intensity completely dictated the franchise's identity for the entire decade. Battered and bruised, he practically refused to step off the gridiron. The guys playing alongside him constantly hailed him as the absolute soul of their locker room. Following 13 gritty years in San Diego, Seau took his talents to South Beach with the Miami Dolphins, before ultimately joining the New England Patriots. Deep into the twilight of his playing days, he commanded profound respect for his unmatched veteran savvy and commanding locker room presence. When he finally hung up his cleats in 2010, Seau had battled in the trenches for 2 full decades, cementing an untouchable legacy as an absolutely terrifying force at linebacker. Sadly, his post-football life took a shockingly dark turn. On May 2nd, 2012, Seau was discovered lifeless inside his Oceanside, California residence. Officials confirmed the tragic end of the 43-year-old icon. His jarring, unexpected passing instantly ignited intense scrutiny regarding the lifelong toll of the sport. Just a few months later, medical experts examining his brain validated those exact nightmares. Top researchers over at the National Institutes of Health made the grim determination that Seau had been battling CTE. That horrifying medical revelation thrust him squarely into the white-hot spotlight of the escalating controversy surrounding neurological trauma on the turf. His grieving relatives eventually took the NFL to court, aggressively arguing that the top brass intentionally hid the devastating dangers of relentless head collisions from their athletes. That fierce legal showdown ultimately wrapped up behind closed doors with an undisclosed financial agreement with the league. As the courtroom drama played out, His kids were forced to navigate a blinding media circus, constantly dissecting the loss of their dad. Junior Seau left behind 4 children: Tyler, Sydney, Jake, and Hunter. The eldest, Tyler, came into the world in 1989. Born to his dad's high school sweetheart, Tyler actively dodged the relentless flashing cameras, choosing to process his father's passing far away from the public eye. Sydney Seau, on the other hand, boldly stepped up as the family's primary spokesperson. When her dad received his gold jacket from the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2015, she delivered a stunning public tribute to his immense legacy. Her deeply moving words captured the soaring triumph of his athletic feats, intertwined with the agonizing heartbreak of his final days. She masterfully tackled the brutal paradox, honoring an unstoppable gridiron hero while simultaneously facing the devastating mental decay inflicted by the very game he loved. Meanwhile, Jake Seau carved out a completely separate trajectory in the athletic world, swapping the pigskin for a stick. He dominated the lacrosse field at Duke University before eventually inking a pro contract with the Dallas Rattlers. His choice to sidestep football naturally turned heads, especially given the skyrocketing public anxiety over catastrophic concussions in the sport. Hunter, the baby of the family, managed to stay completely off the radar while the massive lawsuit against the league raged on. By the time they finally struck a deal with the executives in 2018, he had barely celebrated his 18th birthday. Now, on to Steve McNair. The man was undeniably one of the most incredibly resilient quarterbacks to ever sling a pass, until his journey was cut short by a mind-numbing tragedy. Raised in the small town of Mount Olive, Mississippi, McNair was an absolute force of nature on the football field, the baseball diamond, and the basketball court. He also tore up the track at Mount Olive High School, showcasing an otherworldly athleticism from a remarkably young age. During his junior campaign, he single-handedly dragged his squad to a state title, racking up statistics that made him Mississippi's most lethal weapon. Even with massive collegiate buzz surrounding him, certain scouts foolishly demanded a position swap. One powerhouse program even slapped a running back scholarship on the table instead of letting him throw. McNair flat-out rejected the disrespect, taking his cannon of an arm to Alcorn State University so he could stay firmly under center. Down at Alcorn State, he rapidly evolved into a terrifying, unstoppable nightmare for every collegiate defense he faced. Back in 1994, he put together what is widely considered the most spectacular single-season performance in the history of Division I AA. He shattered expectations with over 6,000 total yards through the air and on the ground, punching in an absurd 56 touchdowns, racking up 571 offensive yards per game. He absolutely obliterated the record books across every single college tier. That God-tier showcase naturally won him the prestigious Walter Payton Award and secured a staggering third-place finish for the legendary Heisman Trophy. By the time he packed his collegiate bags, he had aired it out for over 15,000 yards and amassed a jaw-dropping 17,000 total yards of offense. That level of sheer gridiron tyranny made him the absolute wildest prospect going into the 1995 pro draft. The Houston Oilers snatched him up with the number 3 overall pick, cementing his legacy as one of the highest-drafted black signal callers the league had ever seen. He spent his first couple of years absorbing wisdom behind seasoned veterans before finally taking the reins full-time in 1997, right as the franchise packed its bags for Tennessee. The moment he firmly planted his flag as the undisputed leading man, he fully hijacked the identity of the squad that would eventually become the Tennessee Titans, bringing an utterly distinct swagger to the pocket. He merged a lethal throwing arm with a brutally physical rushing attack, happily eating monstrous tackles that would have snapped any normal quarterback in half. During the 1999 campaign, he willed the Titans all the way to their inaugural championship showcase in Super Bowl 34. Tennessee famously fell a single yard short of tying it up as the clock expired, dropping a heartbreaker to the St. Louis Rams. But McNair just kept churning out absolute powerhouse seasons straight through the early 2000s. He hit his absolute prime in 2003, launching the football for over 3,200 yards, striking for 24 scores, and giving away a mere 7 picks. During that legendary run, he split the league's highest individual honor, the most valuable player trophy, alongside gridiron icon Peyton Manning, shattering barriers. He stood as one of the earliest African-American signal callers to claim that prestigious hardware, cementing his place within an incredibly exclusive football fraternity. Following a long, grueling tenure in Tennessee, mounting physical setbacks and bitter financial disputes forced a blockbuster move to Baltimore in 2006. The veteran instantly transformed the franchise, guiding them to an AFC North crown behind a dominant 13-3 run. He battled through 2 campaigns there before finally hanging up his cleats in 2008, capping off 13 exhausting professional seasons. When he finally walked away from the game, he stood as one of just 3 passers in history to shatter the monumental barrier of 30,000 yards through the air, while also racking up 3,500 yards on the ground. Off the turf, he raised a quartet of boys: Tyler, Trenton, Stephen Jr., and Stephen O'Brien, bouncing constantly between his Mississippi roots and his Nashville sanctuary. The retired star even launched his very own dining establishment right in the heart of Tennessee. To the outside world, his post-gridiron existence looked picture-perfect, but that illusion violently shattered into pieces on the 4th of July, 2009. Authorities discovered the legendary quarterback lifeless within a downtown apartment, lying next to a 20-year-old woman named Sahel Jenny Kazami. Detectives quickly painted a grim picture, a devastating murder-suicide. Crime scene analysts pieced together a horrifying final act, revealing that Kazami fired several fatal rounds into the slumbering athlete on the sofa before ultimately taking her own life. The abrupt, violent end of this recently departed sporting icon sent shockwaves ripping through the sports world. In the wake of the bloodshed, 4 young boys were suddenly left fatherless, leaving behind a massive fortune originally appraised at roughly $20 million. His vast wealth instantly plunged into a chaotic courtroom nightmare simply because he never drafted a final testament, governed by strict state inheritance statutes. Every single penny of that sprawling empire legally required a meticulous division between his grieving wife and his offspring. Judges ultimately signed off on crucial monetary distributions to support the kids, even as the bulk of his staggering fortune sat completely paralyzed by ongoing litigation. Right at the dawn of the bitter judicial battle, every single one of the 4 boys secured payouts easily reaching into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Eventually, authorities established heavily guarded financial shelters for his youngest boys, Tyler and Trenton, locking away upwards of $1 million to guarantee their lifelong stability. Even though the agonizing courtroom drama dragged on for ages, this money fundamentally guaranteed that his descendants would forever reap the rewards of his grueling, blood, sweat, and tears football legacy. Enter Phillip Adams. This fierce defensive back endured a brutal existence, bouncing endlessly from locker room to locker room as a quintessential professional journeyman. Hailing from the streets of Rock Hill, South Carolina, this young man transformed into an absolutely electrifying physical specimen right from the jump, tearing up the local high school scene on both the gridiron and the hardwood. He flashed a lethal combination of blazing velocity and raw intuition that eventually catapulted him into the big leagues. The journey brought him to a collegiate campus in his home state, where he locked down wide receivers as a ferocious coverman between 2006 and 2009. Throughout those formative campaigns, the relentless defender morphed into an absolute menace, establishing himself as a foundational pillar of their defensive unit. Once his 3rd year rolled around, he dominated the stat sheet, pacing the squad in crucial takedowns and stolen passes. His final amateur campaign only magnified that growing spotlight, racking up a barrage of takeaways and delivering bone-crushing consistency week after week. He rightfully snagged premier all-conference accolades to close out his collegiate chapter, blessed with an uncanny knack for decoding opposing signal callers and ambushing throwing trajectories. He suddenly transformed into a deeply coveted, top-tier draft commodity. San Francisco took a gamble on the fiery talent, snagging him deep in the 7th round of the 2010 selection process. But stepping into the pros as a sheer afterthought meant survival was a vicious uphill battle. He clawed tooth and nail just to keep his locker, treating every single practice like a desperate war for employment. Sadly, his inaugural campaign spiraled into a total nightmare almost immediately. deep into a brutal winter clash against the Rams. A vicious collision on a special teams block violently shattered his lower leg, leaving him completely sidelined. The devastating trauma mandated immediate time under the knife, forcing medical professionals to drill metal hardware directly into his fractured bones. This brutal physical detour completely derailed his momentum, ultimately triggering his heartbreaking dismissal from the Bay Area franchise the next calendar year. From that moment on, his professional life became an endless, exhausting nomadic blur, desperately hunting for a permanent home. The resilient warrior ping-ponged across the country, desperately auditioning for franchise after franchise. New England offered a fleeting lifeline in 2011, but that experiment evaporated within mere days. He endured a vicious cycle of getting cut, brought back, and ruthlessly axed again as management endlessly tweaked their lineup. Seattle quickly swooped in, yet his Pacific Northwest stint yielded a single lone appearance before another devastating pink slip arrived. Then, in 2012, Oakland threw him the steadiest lifeline he would ever experience. The gritty defender suited up for 15 brutal matchups during that stretch, famously snagging his premier professional pick while wearing the legendary silver and black. The very next autumn, he conquered an entire 16-game gauntlet, piling up violent collisions and stealing yet another pass. But behind that rising star power, his body was quietly breaking down. Trapped in the trenches of the Raiders' defense, he absorbed several horrific, brain-rattling head traumas within a terrifyingly brief window, violently compounding the massive physiological wreckage that a ruthless sport exacts on a human. Yet, he stubbornly soldiered on, chasing fleeting contracts all over the map. A brief reunion in Seattle gave way to a fresh start with the New York Jets in 2014, where he grinded through 12 brutal contests, laying down hits and snatching one more vital turnover. Come 2015, Atlanta threw him a jersey. He battled through 13 fierce dogfights, throwing his body on the line for both the secondary and kickoff units. But the moment the final whistle blew, the phone simply stopped ringing. A handful of desperate auditions flickered to life, featuring a glimmer of hope in Kansas City and a fleeting summer camp invite from the Indianapolis Colts. Unfortunately, every single one of those desperate final swings turned to dust, completely slamming the door on any sort of miraculous gridiron resurrection. The man who negotiated his contracts noted a disturbing psychological drift during those twilight days, painting a picture of a shattered warrior entirely disconnected from reality. With his inner fire completely smothered, his pro career officially died by 2016. Drifting away from the blinding stadium lights, the former athlete faded into absolute obscurity for years, entirely dodging the relentless glare of the media. But when April 2021 rolled around, his forgotten legacy violently exploded back into the headlines, forever anchoring his identity to an unimaginably gruesome, blood-soaked massacre that left the nation speechless. On the 7th of April, the quiet streets of his childhood hometown in Rock Hill, South Carolina, became the stage for Adams's unthinkable and devastating rampage. Stepping into a local residence, he unleashed an undeniable chaos that instantly claimed the lives of 5 innocent souls right there on the spot. This catastrophic April event saw ex-pro football star Phillip extinguish 6 lives before initiating his own self-inflicted finale, tragically claiming a well-known community physician, the man's spouse, and their 2 little grandkids. A pair of climate control technicians caught in the tragic crossfire suffered mortal wounds as well. One perished in the blink of an eye, and his partner succumbed to the severe trauma shortly afterward. This breathtaking act of aggression sent absolute shockwaves through the neighborhood, capturing the entire country's breathless gaze before the day was even over. Law enforcement rapidly pinpointed Adams as the primary antagonist, entirely locking down the property he fled to while desperately trying to talk him down from the ledge. Desperate to establish a secure line of dialogue during the tense blockade, tactical teams blasted messages over bullhorns and even deployed a mechanical drone right into the living room. Yielding was never part of his plan, and after a grueling multi-hour wait as the authorities breached the perimeter, he sealed his own dark fate within those very walls. Barely 32 years of age, His sudden explosion of rage baffled investigators, especially since his past was completely wiped clean of any prior legal troubles. Locals and longtime friends were left entirely grasping at straws, desperately trying to piece together the fractured puzzle of a man they thought they knew so well. Shortly after the heartbreak unfolded, his grieving father, Alonzo Adams, stood before the press, heavily implying that the brutal gridiron trenches had shattered his boy's fragile mind. Loved ones recalled how, for years prior to his final departure, he constantly battled agonizing skull splitters, slipping memories, and endless nights of relentless insomnia. Following his devastating exit, medical professionals launched a rigorous, microscopic deep dive into the inner workings of his cerebral cortex. Elite neurological researchers up at Boston University eventually uncovered the grim truth: his mind had been ravaged by an extraordinarily brutal progression of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Scientific authorities highlighted massive, irreparable deterioration strictly localized within the frontal lobes of his gray matter, the exact neurological command centers responsible for keeping basic human judgment and emotional stability firmly in check. Alonzo eventually launched a fierce legal battle against South Carolina State University, fiercely accusing the institution of hiding the dark realities of cranial impact and completely abandoning their duty to shield his boy during his collegiate playing days. This courtroom crusade firmly alleges that a relentless barrage of collegiate concussions directly paved the way for the catastrophic brain decay that derailed his later years. Eclipsed by the glaring media spotlight lay a deeply intimate sorrow. He permanently left a young son to navigate the world, totally fatherless. Official judicial documents tied to the litigation paint a devastating picture of a little boy enduring unimaginable psychological torment in the wake of his dad's horrific final act. Demaryius Thomas dedicated a grueling 10 years to meticulously crafting what would become an absolutely legendary, generation-defining athletic legacy. Raised in the sleepy limits of Montrose, Georgia, his youth was shattered overnight when a fierce tactical raid swept up both his mom and grandma for running a clandestine narcotics operation. The gavel fell with crushing weight. His mother was locked away for 2 long decades, while his grandmother caught a permanent, life-binding stint behind bars. Stripped of his immediate caretakers, the young boy was essentially passed around and nurtured by an extended network of resilient family members. Rising fiercely from the ashes of that fractured upbringing, he morphed into an absolute athletic freak, ultimately snatching a golden ticket to dominate the gridiron at the Georgia Institute of Technology. Once he stepped foot on the vibrant, sprawling campus of Georgia Tech, this prodigy instantly cemented his terrifying reputation as arguably the most dangerously electric pass catcher the Atlantic Coast Conference had ever witnessed. Despite operating inside a notoriously run-obsessed playbook, he stacked up mind-boggling statistics, flashing the lethal vertical speed that would one day become his absolute trademark in the pros. The dam totally broke in 2009 as he shattered the 1,000-yard ceiling, transforming into a spectacularly coveted perimeter weapon ahead of the 2010 selection process. Denver snagged him instantly with a premium first-round ticket, and over the following years, he relentlessly evolved into the undisputed, beating heart of their aerial assault. Forging an almost telepathic bond with legendary signal caller Peyton Manning, he helped mutate the Broncos' scoring machine into an absolute nightmare for rival defenses across the league. The man cranked out several 1,000-plus-yard campaigns, effortlessly danced into the end zone dozens of times, and permanently lived at the absolute summit of pro football's elite receiving charts. His absolute masterpiece unfolded in the 2011 postseason. Snagging a lightning-fast slant, he evaporated the Pittsburgh defense on a blistering 80-yard, sudden death sprint to unbelievable glory. Seeking completely fresh horizons, he eventually broadened his sprawling legacy, far past the Rocky Mountains, embarking on short but incredibly impactful crusades down in Houston, up in New England, and over with the New York Jets. The relentless toll of father time and mounting physical setbacks eventually cooled his jets, leading him to gracefully hang up his cleats in June of 2021 following an epic 10-year run. But merely a handful of months into his sunset years, disaster struck hard. On the 9th of December, 2021, The legend was found entirely devoid of life within the quiet walls of his Roswell estate. Gone at just 33. The early whispers blamed an unexplained physical glitch. Yet the devastating reality slowly bubbled to the surface through heart-wrenching family confessions and clinical investigations. Those intense clinical probes revealed the silent phantom he fought a vicious convulsion disorder that ultimately triggered his heart's catastrophic final failure. During the agonizing countdown to his sudden departure, his tight-knit inner circle watched in absolute horror as his vibrant personality started rapidly unraveling. Mom and Dad later recounted a chilling timeline of evaporating memories, blinding head-pounders, wild emotional roller coasters, and dark bouts of locking himself away from the world. The athlete himself was profoundly terrified by his failing vessel, heartbreakingly confessing to his mother that the man staring back in the mirror was basically a total stranger, seeking profound answers beyond the grave. His family entrusted his mind to elite scientists hunting down the invisible, lingering demons caused by high-impact sports collisions. The microscopic deep dive yielded a devastatingly clear verdict. The football icon had been silently wrestling with stage 2 chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Experts theorized that the fatal neurological misfires claiming his life were the tragic climax of countless jarring impacts suffered over a lifetime, a brutal cocktail of gridiron collisions and off-field physical traumas. The gut-wrenching revelation completely shattered his loved ones, yet it finally pierced through the fog, making chilling sense of the bizarre behaviors they watched him endure throughout his final days. His dad ultimately revealed a tragic secret. Thomas was fighting a silent war in the shadows, desperately consulting doctors to decipher the terrifying reality closing in on him. Drop your absolute rawest takes down below. Before you vanish, smash that thumbs up and lock in your subscription to the NFL Rivals Network so you never miss our next explosive drop.